episode of Transitioning Humanitarians Live. With you, your host, Asel, and Vicky couldn't make it today, so that's why apologies for that. But otherwise, I will be doing a very short live to talk about how to analyze failures, right? So that's the topic of this month is failures, how to deal with it, and all the things relating to failures. So, in other words, whatever that we set for ourselves as a goal or is what we want, and then how we didn't go and arrive at that place. So, the way that I was thinking about how to make it so simple and so applicable so that everyone can start using it, and I have tried so many different tools available to analyze failures, and we can get very scientific about it, or we can get very statistical about it, or we can get very sophisticated about it. But then, what I realized for myself, at least in my experience, that um, even if I do those type of evaluations of why I failed and what could have been done differently, I realize that I don't tend to apply a lot of them, or I tend to forget about them and then go move on. Right. So that's why, depending on, of course, what kind of personality, you can try different tools. But what I want to introduce here and encourage you to use it is something that's very simple, something that you can absolutely do. And even if you couldn't do one thing, the one that I'm introducing here, that will help you make changes in the most profound ways possible. And that has been my experience of doing it. So, the way that I have found this analysis of failure is focusing on one thing. And whenever I set for myself a goal and I didn't achieve it, the way that I do it is I have a regular way of looking at things, like maybe once a week, so or once a month, whatever the preference you have. But then focusing on one thing. So in other words, what could be one thing that I could have done differently or that I didn't do or whatever it is that caused that failure, right? Probably when it comes to failures, there might have been several things, several factors, but the way that we can focus on one thing and changing that or making it different could still make a lot of the difference instead of not learning the lesson at all, instead of not even reflecting on things. So that's why focusing on that one thing could be very useful. And I always suggest you to focus on a feeling because feelings are such great indicators of what's going on, right? So that's why. So I will give you like three examples that I thought of from my clients and from my own experience, and I will highlight it to you how that is applied, and then you can decide for yourself how you can also apply this to yourself. So when I talk about one thing, if you have difficulty with feelings and you're not this person who says, "Ah, I'm not the feeling person," or whatever it is, then still focus on one thing uh, that could have caused this failure, whatever it is, whatever the action it is, whatever the factor you think it is. So focus on that one thing and then just start asking several questions around it. And I will demonstrate it to you now with these three examples. So the first example comes from one of my clients who was telling me that she was failing ahead of time, right? So in advance, meaning that she didn't even let herself come to the actual fail. She was just trying to protect herself and avoid any disappointments, any rejections, and therefore staying in that space where she doesn't want to, but at the same time, it feels safe, it feels secure, or it feels like less risky. And that was in the context of dating, for instance, right? So she wanted to date someone, but then she kept telling herself that there are no men out there. There are all in a different place, but not in this duty station because this is a non-family duty station, right? So a lot of the reasons why she didn't even allow herself to go to that dating. Now, she recognized that this is one of her situations where she actually wants something. The goal is to go and date someone, but she's not achieving it because she's not even allowing herself to go through that process and therefore keep failing ahead of time, right? So then the analysis that she can do, or the way that she can see for herself, like troubleshoot why she keeps failing herself in advance, even though she recognized that that's what's happening, but she's not really doing anything about it, right? So therefore, the useful thing could be for her in that situation, focusing on one thing of what what is the one thing that is causing her not to go for it, right? What could be one thing that could be removed and then she would go for it. So maybe in her case, it could be something like, um, even if there are no people out there, let's imagine, but I will still go on that date and see for myself the experience, right? So that could be one way. Or she could be focusing on analyzing another thought of that that and like people in the non-Jewish station are not really ready for serious committed relationships, right? So she could look at that and focus on that, or she could focus on frustration and find out where this frustration is coming from, and that frustration could be because of this believing, or we believe like an observation that because there are no such men in this jurisdiction who are ready for a committed relationship because this is a non-jurisdiction, right? Non-family jurisdiction or whatever. So we could look at that thought and then decide what are we going to do about it. Do we want to keep thinking that keep intervening in our further actions in dating and exploring a relationship with someone else, or we decide to not generalize it and remove it from our spectrum? So that could be like one of the ways that you can look at how am I allowing myself to fail in advance, and then preventing myself from going actually through that dating, right? So therefore, when you realize that, when you focus on one thing, if you remove that thing, then would you go for it? Would you go to that date? If not, then you could focus on another thing, on another thought, right? And then removing that, and then would you be able to go? Or you could also focus on what is it, the one thing that will allow you to go through that, even if the other thoughts keep remaining, right? So that's why the way that you troubleshoot, the analyze the failure of how and why are you failing, you can recognize first how you're failing, and then recognize one thing that could change the course of that direction, one thing that could allow you to go through that without continue to failing in advance. So that is one example. The second example that I want to bring from another client who went through the interview process for another job, right? And she felt like she was doing a good job, all of this. And then she even thought that she would get the job. But then there was also another part of her thinking like maybe they already have someone in this organization. They always create the jobs for someone particular. So that's why maybe that's not really for me, right? So, and then she didn't get the job. Now, if we are troubleshooting and analyzing that failure, in her eyes, that would be a failure, right? So she went through the job interview and then she didn't get the job. And she would consider that a failure. So now, how do we learn from that failure so we can go and move on to the next thing, right? In this case, again, we can focus on one thing. So here, what's interesting is that when we focus on one thing, she tends to go more towards, oh, they already had someone else, and that's why they didn't really pick me. They didn't really listen to me. They were not really interested in, excuse me, they just did the formality thing. That's the usual reaction that she would have. And then I understand that that might be the case, or maybe let's assume that that is one of the possibilities, right? But if we just keep focusing on that possibility, we don't really learn much of the failure that could be useful for us to go into the future other interviews. Because if we just keep hung up on how they had their own person, which we don't know, but let's assume that's true, we if we hang up on that thing, then we will not really learn to improve on the interview, what other things that we could improve on, so that when there is a vacancy, that we actually go and do our best, right? So that's why, if that's your like brain wanting to go to how others are this, how others are that, don't focus on that in your analysis of the failure, because that will not be useful for you. That will not give you any insight into what you could have done from your side, what is within your control, what you could have done from your side to make the difference in that interview. So that's why, if we remove that part and focus on the part that we actually want to improve and take it to the next interview, then we could focus on, maybe we could focus on the feeling of feeling frustrated, right? So why are we being feeling frustrated? Maybe because we're feeling frustrated because we believe that these posts are only created for certain people, and this is just a formality. Maybe those are the type of thoughts that are creating frustration. Now we could get even further curious about this thought and say that, how do we actually show up when we are feeling, or when we are feeling frustrated, but also when we are thinking this thought of, what's the point? There is not going to be any chance anyway. Then how are we actually going to show up, right? Because I'm imagining, if it was me, I would probably be showing up in a way that's like, I'm also doing it just for the formality's sake, because of my own belief that they're doing it for formality, right? Ironically, that whatever the thing that I think they are doing, I end up doing it myself as well. Do you see what I'm saying? And and that's probably not what we want in job interviews. So that's why the next question then we can ask and analyze in that scenario of, okay, so if this thought is not really helping, even though maybe it is true somewhere, but we never know that. So if this thought is not helping, then how are we going to approach the interview instead, right? So I would rather go and approach the interview in the way that doing my best and sharing all the things that I want to share in that interview, doing my showing my experience and what I'm capable of and my competences as best I know how to, believing that this job is really available to anyone who merits it, right? So that's why you could really use this failure analysis in the way that is useful for you to move forward and unblock yourself, or like overcome something so that you can go forward, allowing yourself to go to the next attempt to get something, instead of just staying in the, oh, this is not happening and this is not possible, and then end of story, right? So the third example that I want to use for my own example, because I have been having several failures recently, and I was looking at it as well and analyzing for myself. And one of the things that I have found is that the reason why I haven't achieved what I wanted is because of commitment. Now it gets interesting as to why I wasn't committed, right? And the reason why I wasn't committed, if I started looking into why I'm not committed or why I wasn't, is because I didn't really believe that what I set to do is what I'm also capable of creating in the time frame that I wanted to. Right. So I really didn't believe that I can do that. And that's very interesting information. Then I can decide, okay, why am I not believing that I can create what I said I would do in that time frame? One of the reasons could be because I'm not used to believing that this is possible, right? Because um, maybe I just believe that things don't happen in the time frame that I said I would create it. Another one could be that I don't really take my dreams seriously, my goals seriously. And I was thinking that if I was committed to my goal as much as I was committed to doing all the things in my previous career, then I would be having all my goals met. So interesting that when it comes to other people, I'm ready to do all the commitment necessary and everything. But when it comes to my own goals, I'm committed only when other things are not as important. So that's why realizing that is so important. So then I can then decide, okay, what do I want to do now with it? How do I want to grow my commitment to the things that I said I would do in the time frame I said I would? how am I going to grow it, and what are the things I need to do in order to grow it, and how do I show to myself that I actually know how to commit to my goals, to what I really want to, and I also know how to commit to creating those things that I want to without hustling or without feeling stressful and pressured and all the things. And this is an interesting journey, then you can start exploring and implementing it. So this is what I really wanted to give you as a tool, as a way to think about how you can learn from each failure. And whenever you decide to be a failure, then you can get curious to focus on one thing, and that one thing can give you so much information if you start asking more and more curious questions. And of course, always analyzing from not reproaching um, mindset, or not from self like critical mindset or like criticizing mindset, but rather from the curiosity mindset of interesting, why I didn't achieve what I said I would, or why I didn't arrive at the place I wanted to, and what could be one thing that could make a difference, or what could be one thing that's causing it, or what could be one thing that I could work on that would then make a difference for the next time I'm trying. And then we start going and going and keep improving and improving, learning so much about ourselves while also getting to the goal that we want. Okay, my dears, have an amazing week, you all. If you want to get coaching on this or any other topics that we cover, I would love to coach you, and you let us know, Vicky and myself, and she will be here next time. So until then, we wish you a great week.